What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be comparing all of Motorola's 2024 Moto G smartphones. This year, Motorola really improved their lineup across the board, and I honestly think any one of these would be a great device to have depending on your budget and your daily smartphone needs. But if you want certain specs or special features, all four of these phones kind of have their own pros and cons that might wind up being that deciding factor for you. Motorola's Moto G lineup this year consists of the Moto G Play, the regular Moto G, I guess, with no other descriptor word attached to it, the Moto G Power, and the Moto G Stylus. They each kind of have like one or two unique things that differentiates them. For example, the G Play is by far the cheapest at $150. The G Stylus obviously has its stylus with the writing experience and all that. The regular Moto G and the Moto G Power differ mainly in their processors and overall performance capabilities. Those are certainly some things to consider, and I'm going to go over all of that and more here so you can figure out which one of these Gs, if any, is right for you. Now, one quick thing to note, this is going to be more of just a broad overview and comparison video of each device, not an in-depth review. That would just take too long. But if you want to dive deeper with one phone in particular, I have dedicated videos on each that I'll link down in the video description so you can learn even more about a particular phone if you're interested. So first things first, let's talk about the prices. And I'm going to reiterate what I always say about buying Motorola smartphones. Say it with me if you know. Don't ever pay full price for a Moto device. The Moto G Play is the cheapest of the bunch. It's listed at $149 on Motorola's website. But between the regular discounts on Amazon and other third-party retailers and the crazy carrier offers, you can easily save $50 or more on the G Play. I mean, Verizon, for example, has it as a prepaid phone right now for $69. The next step up is the regular Moto G. You'll also see it listed as the Moto G 5G, and on Motorola's website, it's selling for $199. So officially $50 more than the Play, but again, a quick Google search is going to show you a bunch of offers for this phone. It's $99 from Verizon prepaid. It's technically free on T-Mobile with a new line. You can see why I say never pay full price for these phones. There's just so many opportunities to get them for cheap. The Moto G Power is actually a pretty big jump up on the price ladder. It's $299 direct from Motorola, but once again, if you're flexible and want a decent deal, it's $99 from AT&T as well, or free from Cricket if you're a new or existing customer. I realize the overall price comparisons here, phone to phone, don't make a ton of sense with all the various carrier deals, but I just want to make sure I give you the big picture with both the full retail price and all the potential ways to save some money. The Moto G Stylus is by far the most expensive of the bunch at $399, and at that price, that phone is approaching some of the higher tier smartphones for sure. You'll still find some deals and discounts out there though. Visible has it listed for $260. Metro has some options depending on if you're a new or existing customer. It could technically be a free phone. If you for some reason do feel the urge to pay full price for these phones, maybe you prefer a fully unlocked device, or if the specific carrier deals aren't available to you, the main takeaway here is that with each $50 or $100 price jump, you are going to get a better phone. But how much better and whether those extra dollars yield the difference you're looking for, I think that is up for debate. So let's now dive into the differences between the specs and features. So size-wise, arguably, all four of these phones look the same, but the Moto G Play has the smallest display at 6.5 inches, the regular Moto G is a tad bigger at 6.6 inches, and the G Power and G Stylus are a smidge bigger still at 6.7 inches each. Now, does that tenth of an inch matter in either direction? No, not at all. I mean, between the biggest and smallest of the four phones, you really can't tell them apart, and even in the hand, there's not much of an advantage or disadvantage. They feel the same. They're all just big phones that I think most people will still appreciate. The only other thing people do get nitpicky about is the bezels, those black borders that frame the display. The G Play definitely has the worst screen to body ratio here, with a thick bottom chin and chunky frame around the screen. And opposite of that, the G Stylus actually has a really modern look. Motorola shrunk those bezels a ton this year, and it's probably the best looking Moto G device from the front they've ever offered. As for the rest of the build around back, 3 of the 4 phones, the regular G, G, the G Power, and the G Stylus all have Motorola's new eco leather material, while the G Play is all plastic. I do prefer the faux leather personally. I think it's both unique and sort of a semi-premium setup. The sides and frame of all four phones, though, is just a thick plastic with a metallic-like sheen. They are all water repellent, that's what Motorola says, and otherwise there's no other unique materials or build characteristics with any one in particular. On the left side, all four phones have removable SD card trays with micro SD card support for expandable storage, and this is great, especially for the cheaper G Play. You only get 64 gigabytes of onboard storage for that phone, while the rest of the lineup has double that, 128 gigs, with the G Stylus having an even bigger 256 gigabyte configuration option. Popping in a $30 1 terabyte SD card is definitely the move here, and like I said, I think this favors the G Play, especially since you don't have to be deterred by its small storage capacity if you want to save some money and get that cheaper phone. On the right side, all four phones seem to have similar volume and power buttons, but on the G Play, regular Moto G, and G Power, their power buttons double as the fingerprint sensor for unlocking. The G Stylus, however, has the fancier in-display fingerprint reader, a first for a Moto G device. They all also have face unlock, by the way, so you pretty much have your choice as far as your favorite unlocking method. All four of these phones do still have the old school headphone jack. On the G Play, it's at the top for whatever reason. On the rest of the phones, it's at the bottom. There's the same USB-C charging port on all, essentially the same bottom speaker. And on the G Stylus, obviously, you'll also see that extra spot where its built-in stylus lives. And just to quickly touch on that, the standout feature for the Moto G Stylus, of course, is its physical stylus and the handful of apps that support it. The stylus itself is a little better this year. It's a thicker, heavier pen with a nice feel. The set of apps you get haven't changed much, though. There's Motorola's own writing and drawing apps, a few shortcuts that kind of coincide with the stylus, and you can also use the stylus just as you would your finger to tap and swipe your way through your phone, and also use any third-party writing, drawing, journaling, or stylus-supported apps you personally like. You don't have to just use Moto Notes, for example. This is really the only non-Samsung stylus smartphone out now, and the only one without a crazy high price tag by comparison, so I totally see why it's still popular and why Motorola still continues to offer it. But keep in mind too, which I'll touch on in just a second, that while the stylus is the defining feature on this phone, the G Stylus as a whole is a better class of smartphone overall with its specs, like the processor and display. So you aren't just paying so much more money for that little built-in pen. Speaking of the displays, this I think is one of the biggest and most important things to consider when choosing one of these Gs. 3 out of the 4 phones have the typical subpar Moto displays, while one, the Moto G Stylus, finally has a display worth getting excited about. The G Stylus has a new to Motorola P-OLED screen, while the rest are the older IPS LCD panels. It might be hard to tell at first, but the G Stylus is going to deliver a brighter, more vibrant, and more colorful look to all your videos and content, while the rest of the lineup still struggles with dull, dim, and dated screen setups. On top of that, the cheap G Play and cheaper regular Moto G have 720 resolution screens, which means at their big sizes, you'll be picking out those pixels, especially with text. The G Power and the G Stylus have 1080 resolution screens, which I think is just the bare minimum for phones this big. And one other thing to note, the G Play also offers just a 90 Hz refresh rate, while the other 3 phones are 120 Hz screens. On the one hand, that's better than 60 Hz, which is also unacceptable nowadays, but I think side by side, you can still see the 120 Hz screen on the G Stylus is much smoother, faster, and more responsive. That's definitely worth some points. Viewing experience overall should be one of the main things you consider when buying a smartphone, and in this case, each device sort of has one more display spec that might be worth it. Jumping from the G Play to the regular G gives you 120 Hz, going from the regular G to the G Power yields you the sharper 1080p resolution, and going all the way up to the G Stylus, you have what I call the trifecta of screen specs with OLED on top of everything else. To me, that's definitely worth the extra money. For your out loud listening experience, interestingly enough, all 4 phones seem to have the same dual speaker setup. There's a larger main speaker at the bottom of each phone and a secondary one hidden in the earpiece. And I'm not going to be too picky about quality here, especially with the G Play getting dual speakers. That's great, but to me, they all basically sound the same, and I'm sure Motorola is likely likely just using the same speaker hardware in each phone. So now let's talk speed and performance. And this really is something that's mainly going to depend on you and what you expect to get out of your phone each day, depending on how you use it. But generally speaking, you can expect some performance difference as you jump up in the lineup. But I'm not sure it'll be so significant that it'll lead you to an easy or obvious decision. The Moto G Play only has 4 GB of RAM, and it's powered by the Snapdragon 680 4G chip. So you could argue it's a fairly low-spec non-5G phone aimed at taking out the easy tasks, but not so powerful for gaming or multitasking. The regular Moto G actually also only has 4 GB of RAM, and it's powered by the Snapdragon 4 Gen 1 chip, but you can see by the Geekbench scores, it's still a decent step up. To me, the Moto G Power with 8 GB of RAM and the MediaTek Dimensity 7200 is sort of the bare minimum if specs and performance are of particular importance to you. The G Stylus also packs in 8 GB of RAM, but you go 1 pip higher on the processor scale with the Snapdragon 6 Gen 1. Now, it's kind of hard to speed test 4 phones at once, at least accurately side by side. Bear with me, I'm going to do my best here, so you can at least see some difference in launch and load times for apps. Arguably, you're not going to experience a major difference every single time you do something, but a vast majority of the time, the G Stylus will finish up whatever it's doing at least a second or two prior to the G Play, for example, the cheapest phone. For people who use their phones for the super basic stuff, is that difference important? Probably not. But the more you ask of your phone, the more the G Stylus will pull ahead, and I do think with each jump up in the lineup, you can push the phones harder with higher expectations. There's honestly multiple things at play here though. The difference in processors is one element for sure. Having half the RAM inside the Play and the regular Moto G also means that apps don't always stay current and running in the background, and the 90Hz display on the G Play especially also makes this phone look and feel slower at times, most often when scrolling or viewing certain animations on screen. There's also the matter of their Android versions. My G Play is still stuck on Android 13, which is wild at this point, but Motorola has never been one with the regular software updates. I know that doesn't bother some people, but in this case it really bothers me, and it just makes me feel like the G Play is still the cheap, unsupported afterthought when Motorola could very well just keep it updated. I can't really speak on the rest of the lineup though in regards to expected software updates. I mean, the G Stylus should get another major Android version at least, you'd think, since it's a $400 phone, but I wouldn't buy any Moto G device on the premise of Android updates, unfortunately. Overall, to me, if performance is your bag, I think the G Power is the bare minimum. The G Stylus is probably worth it dollar for dollar, but comparatively, the cheapest G Play really isn't as bad as this phone once was in years past when you have a chance to actually use them all side by side. When it comes to battery size and charging speeds, there was actually a time when the Moto G Power's power distinction referred to its unique gargantuan battery, but now all of these Moto Gs have the exact same size 5,000 milliamp battery inside powering them. Furthermore, Motorola doesn't do you any favors here since they don't give you a fast charger in the box, but each phone supports fast wired charging speeds, 15 watts for the Play, 18 watts for the regular G, and 30 watts for the Power and the Stylus. Also, the G Power and G Stylus support wireless charging at 15 watts. I don't personally feel that any one phone is going to win a last longer bet by any significant margin since their batteries are the same size and their varying specs impact that in different ways. In my own usage, there hasn't been a big difference, but the fast charging and wireless charging on the higher tier phones I think are worthy additions. Finally, you might be surprised to hear that all 4 of these phones have 50 megapixel cameras around back. But you might be even more surprised to see that each one takes a drastically different picture. The main 50 megapixel shooter on the back of each phone, well, technically the hardware itself is a little different. The sensor size is different. The hardware is newer on the G Stylus, for example, so that accounts for some of the difference. And oh yeah, the other lenses on these phones, they're all different too. The G Stylus gets the best of the best, a 13 megapixel ultra wide. The G Power also has an ultra wide, an 8 megapixel one. The regular Moto G has a worthless 2 megapixel macro lens for up close pictures, and the G Play, well, it actually doesn't have a second lens. That circle there is just the LED flash, so kind of false advertising, I'd say. The selfie cameras also get progressively better up the lineup. You go from 8 megapixels to 8 megapixels again to 16 to 32, and capability-wise, you'll see a couple extra shooting modes and features here and there, especially on the G Stylus with more video options and things. But in all honesty, none of these phones are camera focused, pun intended. They don't compete with mid-tier or flagship Samsungs or Apples at all, and I don't think the cameras should even be much of a deciding factor here. The one to avoid if pictures and videos are your thing is the G Play, obviously, but the other three I don't think gain you much unless you have to have an ultra-wide lens. The other things that affect the pictures and video quality include the processing power and specs of the phone itself, so the better the phone, the better the images will look regardless of that hardware. But you can see that every picture is weirdly different with the color balance, exposure, overall saturation, and detail. It's a collection of pretty over-processed and over-corrected shots that very much scream Motorola, but I suppose if you opt for the G Power or G Stylus, you still wind up with a decent picture taker overall with both the main and ultra-wide lenses. So here's where I stand with these 4 Moto Gs. The G Play for like 50 or 60 bucks from a carrier this year is a fine phone. It's much improved from years past, and I think you can see that while it has some sacrifices, it's not a hunk of junk by comparison. The regular Moto G, to me, honestly is probably the least appealing in the lineup. You pay more, but you don't really get much more, with it still just having 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 720p screen. I don't even think this needs to be in the lineup, honestly. The G Power is probably the best bang for your buck overall. It doesn't get the OLED screen, but it has pretty much everything else you'd want. And the G Stylus, well, it's pricey for sure, but it's the best Moto G device Motorola has ever released. Just don't buy it only for the stylus. Buy it for the OLED screen and the nicer design and the slim bezels and the better specs. But what do you guys think? Was this a helpful comparison? Let me know in the comments down below which of these Moto Gs you'd prefer. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.